Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of the Idea Society, I would like to welcome you all to the 7th lecture of the Idea Society Distinguished Speaker Series. The Idea Society has been an active student organization with a wide range of activities and projects, contributing to the Athens community in general and the University of Georgia in particular. Through our projects and activities, we strive to mobilize the wealth of intellectual capital in our community to promote intellectual dialogue and educational advancement. Some of our major events include the Distinguished Speaker Series, annual Friendship and Dialogue dinners, and promotion of research and educational activities in the Athens, Clark, and Oconee public schools. The annual Friendship and Dialogue dinners are well attended by distinguished members of our community, including UJ administrators and faculty members, government officials, and businessmen. I encourage you all to visit our website for more information on the Idea Society. We are honored and proud to have Dr. Scott Alexander here with us today to talk about moving beyond media's soundbites, Islam, Muslims, and the current global context. Dr. Alexander is currently an associate professor of Islam at Catholic Theological Union in Chicago, where he is also director of the Catholic Muslim Studies program. He has taught courses on Islam and history of the religions at Columbia, Fordham, and Princeton universities. His most recent book project is entitled The Race to Goodness, an End to Triumphalism in Christian-Muslim Relations, and deals with the inherent contradiction between religious claims to universal truth and the religiously motivated desire to impose this truth on others as a means of political and cultural domination. In March of 2007, Dr. Alexander was one of the 5 scholars to be awarded an Association of Theological Schools Faculty Fellowship in support of his research and writing. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Scott Alexander.
Thank you so much, Avi. Thank you. If I reach for my water, I will make sure to make eye contact with everybody in the audience as I do so. Oh, people don't. Professor Godless, thank you so much for coming. Thank you. This is a slightly different technological setup than I'm used to, so I'm hoping there are no unanticipated difficulties. It reminds me of the story, maybe some of you have heard it, of this man who, he and his wife are going to celebrate their 25th wedding anniversary. They live in Wisconsin. It's January, it's very cold, and they honeymooned originally in Miami, so he's going to go down to Miami. They're a two-career couple, so she's going to follow on the next day, but he's going to make sure all the arrangements are okay, and he's tried to get the very same room. The hotel's been renovated, but the very same room they stayed in on their honeymoon. Very, very romantic. You know, the story is really about technology going wrong. You know how when you send an email to somebody and you make a mistake in the email address, the mailer daemon, whatever that is, right, sends you a notification that that address doesn't exist. But there are cases when you make a mistake in typing an email address and it actually goes to somebody. And unfortunately, this is what happened in this case. This man went down and he was preparing for his wife to come, and you know, he went into the hotel room and he was really surprised to find a computer there, you know, with a little sign that encouraged people to send messages to the loved ones. He thought, well, this is a good idea. I'll email my wife and tell, you know, send her a little email telling her what I've accomplished here, you know, etc. But when he types in the email address, he makes a one keystroke mistake. And in this case, one of these rare occasions, it actually goes to a recipient. And meanwhile, in Texas, a woman is coming back from making final arrangements for her husband's funeral. Her husband was a Methodist minister who served the community faithfully for many, many years. And she was really broken up about his death, but it was a bit anticipated because he had been ill for a few years. Family is coming in for the funeral from different parts of the country, and she's keeping up with their travel itineraries by, you know, checking her email. So they get back from the funeral director's home, and her son is with her, and her son goes to make some tea in the kitchen. She goes into the office area, sits down at the computer, and her son hears a gasp from the kitchen. He goes running, and he finds his mother slouched in the chair, almost falling off of the chair. She's actually passed out, thank God, sitting down. And, you know, he straightens her in the chair, Mom, are you okay? And she's reviving a bit, and he's wiping the sweat from her brow, and he looks at the computer screen, and there's a message there. And the content of the message says, "To my beloved wife, from your faithful husband, regarding I've arrived." And the message says, "Darling, I've arrived at my final destination. Many of the things here are as I expected them, but some are not. They have computers here now, and they encourage you to send emails to your loved ones. Please don't worry. Everything has been prepared for your arrival tomorrow." "I can't wait to see you. Your beloved husband. P.S. It sure is hot down here." So, now that works. Okay, so my topic is a huge one, and I have no pretensions to, being able to, in some ways, reach any kind of resolution or finality in terms of exploring such a huge topic. But I'll give you a sense of where I'm coming from with this. I used to go, be asked to give presentations in various places. I do talks at a lot of different universities, but I also do talks at churches and synagogues and Islamic centers and things like that. And particularly churches, particularly Catholic churches, people would sort of would like you to talk about X, Y, and Z. Would like you to talk about the life of the Prophet Muhammad, or the Quran, or Jesus in the Quran, or something like this, And this would be all well and good, but I would notice something, that I would give a presentation, and when it came time for the discussion, Q&A, whatever, none of the questions would be about the presentation. And the reason is, because I wasn't talking about what was on people's minds. Now, if I were going to give a presentation on Buddhism, let's say, for the most part, if I'm going to a Catholic church in suburban, the suburbs of Chicago, most of those Catholics coming into the room would be blank slates when it comes to Buddhism. They don't know much about it. They have very little preconceptions, right? In a post, I want to say post-September 11th, but in some ways just post-Iranian Revolution, but let's talk about post-September 11th global context. Very few people in the United States are walking into a lecture on Islam, whatever has to do with Islam, without a lot of preconceptions, notions, images, ideas buzzing around in their heads. From their encounter with Islam, or what they think is an encounter with Islam, via the mass media. So they're coming into the room with all sorts of questions. And if I'm giving a presentation on Jesus and the Quran, it's not actually addressing the questions they came into the room with, and they like an opportunity to ask those questions. So I thought I would develop a presentation that tried to, based on my experience in these situations, anticipate some of the questions that people are walking into the room with. And that way maybe serve them a little better. So it kind of turned into this presentation, which I subtitled "Moving Beyond Media Soundbites," because as I thought about what I was trying to do, that was it. I don't mean to demonize the mass media, but some issues are too complex to deal with in 30 seconds or the minute spot. And lots of times the anchors on big television network news, for instance, like CNN, and even if they're not actively Islamophobic, they're oftentimes passively Islamophobic, largely because of prejudices or things that they're not even aware of. So, I think the good news is that you can actually make some progress moving beyond the media soundbites if you just have about 45 minutes to sit down and talk about, some of these issues in a little more depth. So that's what I'm going to do. I think I have about 8 points, but I want to be attentive to the time so that we have ample time for Q&A and discussion, so I might not get through all 8. But I do have to get to the last one, because while the presentation may be very weak, the finish is strong. And I know the finish is strong because Stephen Colbert does the finish of this presentation. And he rarely disappoints. And in this case, I don't think he will. So anyway, I can promise you at least that we end with Stephen Colbert. It may be a clip that some of you have seen, but even if some of you have seen it, it's worth seeing and considering, particularly in the context of what I'd like to share with you. So speaking of context, I want to begin by talking about point 1, by talking about our immediate context. You see the Idea Society Istanbul Center. Some of you may know that these organizations are affiliated with really a global Islamic renewal and reform movement. I mean, I'm putting it in that category as a would-be historian of Islam. Called Hizmet, which is the Turkish word for service. It's often referred to as the Gülen movement because the man at the center of this movement, the man who has inspired this global movement, is a man by the name of M. Fethullah Gülen. He is a preeminent Turkish Muslim scholar. He advocates a socio-spiritual approach to the practice of Islam. And by that I mean, you know, his teaching really integrates in a profound way traditional personal, spiritual, and moral character and duty. Ibadah, this notion in classical Muslim discourse, ibadah comes from the same root as the word abd, Abdullah, servant of God. Ibadah is an act of service or one's duty to God. So his approach to the practice of Islam is a deep commitment to ibadat, ritual acts of worship, but also to cultivating the moral life. And integrating that with family values, so moving out from the individual to the family unit, and then moving out from there to the rest of society. So it has what I'm referring to here as consequent social reform reverberations. You know, the idea being that if people become more deeply committed to their most precious values and ideals, and they work out of them in their personal lives and their family lives, this can only have great benefit for the broader society. He emphasizes service, and this is again where the most common word for the movement, Hizmet, this is where that name comes from, principally in the form of education. Gülen believes that the dignity of every human person really is profoundly linked to the capacity of human beings to know things. You know, within certain parameters. I mean, we're finite beings. We can't certainly know everything. Only God knows everything from the perspective of Mr. Gülen. But human beings are created by God to become aware not only of the existence of God and their relationship with God, but also of the world that they inhabit, so that they can live most fully into their potential in that world. So his notion of service is deeply rooted in a commitment to education, to providing quality education for people, particularly young people who may be underserved, who may not have access to quality education. And so there are 1,000 plus schools worldwide, in Turkey, in the United States, in South Africa, in northern Iraq, in Nigeria, in Indonesia, in Pakistan, in the Central Asian republics, all over the world, that are staffed by people, founded by people who are committed to the spiritual teachings and the educational philosophy of Fethullah Gülen. So education is an important piece of service. social justice, particularly in the form of aid and relief. There's an organization called Kimzayokmu, which means, is anybody there? Is anybody out there? It comes from there was an earthquake, and someone was heard crying out, is anybody there? And so this organization formed of people who were affiliated with Hizmet to provide aid for people in distress. And then, of course, intercultural and interreligious dialogue, which is part of what the Istanbul Center and the Idea Society are dedicated to in terms of their missions. I just wanted to finish my remarks on Fethullah Gülen as sort of, you know, the first point I wanted to make, to introduce you to someone who is an important part of, you know, Islam, Muslims in the current global context, someone about whom you may not have heard before. But I do want to share with you just one little pearl from his teachings that I have found to be extremely moving, but somewhat not exactly accessible unless you know a little Turkish. And I know very, 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 very little Turkish, but enough to know that the word that's used to translate, the word in English in the writings and teachings of Fethullah Gülen, that is tolerance. You see that a lot. There's even a title of a book of his called Tolerance, right? The Turkish word is hoşgörü. Tolerance, you know, has a positive valence in English, but it also has a negative valence. I'm putting up with you. I'm tolerating you. You know, but the word in Turkish comes from two roots: hoş meaning good, görmek meaning to see. Hoşgörü means seeing in a good light, or seeing the goodness in the other. Okay, and Gülen actually says that we are duty bound to look upon our fellow human beings through the lens of hoşgörü. Why? Because that is the lens that God uses to look upon God's creation, and particularly human beings. Despite all our faults and all our sins, God looks deeply into our goodness, and His bestowal of mercy upon us is intimately connected to the divine practice of hoşgörü. And this is just one quote about hoşgörü from Hoca Efendi. This is a title for him, meaning you know, distinguished teacher. Practice hoşgörü so that your bosom becomes wide like the ocean. Become inspired with faith and love of human beings. Let there be no troubled souls to whom you do not offer a hand, and about whom you remain unconcerned. So just one person that is, you know, profoundly related to our immediate context, because so many of the people at Istanbul Center Idea Society are admirers of Fethullah Gülen. And his teachings have made a real difference in their lives. So I thought it seemed logical to begin there. Now I want to talk about the broader U.S.-American context. And so we get into some things that are a little darker than hoşgörü. This is taken from the Southern Poverty Law Center's Spring 2012 report. Anti-Muslim hate crimes soared by 50% in 2010, skyrocketing over 2009 levels, 107 to 160. In a year marked by the incendiary rhetoric of Islam-bashing politicians and activists, especially over the so-called Ground Zero Mosque in New York City. It was the highest level of anti-Muslim hate crimes since 2001, the year of the September 11th attacks, when the FBI reported 481 anti-Muslim hate crimes. The year and those are of course all the ones that are reported. The year 2010 saw multiple verbal attacks on planned mosques, along with several violent attacks and arsons, and the first attempts to ban Sharia religious law, even though the Constitution already precludes such a ban. We're going to get to this whole issue of Sharia law. That's actually what Stephen Colbert is going to address for us at the end of my presentation. So let me just, so that kind of just sets the context again is not people walking into a room like this, with a blank slate when it comes to Islam. There's stuff written on your slate, and to no fault of yours, really, necessarily, I don't know each of you individually, but a lot of what's written on that slate, is statistically probably negative. The third point I want to make is it's kind of an axiom of my discipline, also the discipline of Professor Godless and people who are in religious studies or the history of religions. And that is that one of the most misleading things that we do as scholars of religion, and certainly just as a culture in general, when we talk about religious traditions, is we use nouns in the singular to refer to them. Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, Islam. Why are these singular nouns a problem? They're a problem because the singularity of the noun often occludes the stunning diversity that one finds, under the umbrella category of something like Christianity. If you think about Christianity, if you just look in the Atlanta Yellow Pages, if such things exist anymore online or whatever, and you look at Christian churches, right, you'll find pages and pages and pages, or you'll scroll down, all sorts of denominations, all sorts of varieties of Christianity. And that's only in the early 21st century here in a major city in Georgia. Now, if you think about Christianity spanning its entire history, all the different cultural manifestations of Christianity, not only synchronically here in the present, but also diachronically across the history, again, talking about a single Christianity is very misleading. And the same can be said, of course, about Islam. It is not a monolith. It is a faith lived out in a variety of different cultural and historical expressions, some of which certain Muslims deem to be more authentic than others. That's a reference really to the sectarian dynamic that also exists in these traditions, where a certain amount of diversity of perspective, interpretation, practice will be tolerated within a given tradition or faith community, and then there's too much diversity. Too much of what's perceived to be diverging from what perhaps the majority understands to be the normative practice, the normative beliefs. And so that usually then occasions some kind of break or schism or sectarian development, and this is common also to all religious traditions. So it's just kind of an axiom that I offer as point 3 as we kind of think about Islam, Muslims, and the current global context. Now I want to try a little experiment. I know this is an erudite group. I should actually disqualify certain people from participating, but I won't do that. Does anyone know who this woman is? Just by show of hands. Don't say her name. Okay. One person. Anyone else? Okay. Who is she? Yeah, wow, brilliant. Tawakkul Karman, right? And why has she become well known? Right, she was one of the most recent recipients of the Nobel Peace Prize for being one of the, inspiring, committed individuals in the Jasmine Revolution in her native Yemen. Okay? Now, this is wonderful. I have to tell you, you get the prize, and so do you, sir, because most of the time, most audiences, when you put this picture up, nobody knows who she is. And it doesn't matter, this is particularly not in university settings, but if you go to your communal centers or churches or mosques, this is important. In the United States, you put up her image and people, they think they know who she is. They may have seen the face, but they're not really sure. Okay? So this is a Muslim Nobel Peace Prize winner. Right? And many of you, most of you probably well-read, everything, but just a couple of folks in this group recognize her face and know who she is. Now I have a kind of inverse question to ask you. Is there anybody here that doesn't know who this is? You see? And I hope you see the problem. It's just a simple problem of perception. It's the same reaction if I go to an Islamic center. It's the same reaction. The vast majorities of the Muslims in the United States don't know who Tawakkol Karman is, and every Muslim knows who Osama bin Laden is. The difference is in the predominantly non-Muslim audiences, there's a lot of chuckling and laughter because it's kind of funny. In the Muslim audience, there's a lot of sighs because there's a realization, oh boy, we all recognize the global terrorist who, self-identified as a Muslim, but we don't recognize the Nobel Peace Prize winner who self-identifies as a Muslim. So there's a certain problem with perception. Anyone recognize this guy? Nidal Malik Hassan, right, Killeen, Texas. Actually, I put him here because really he has nothing to do with this guy, even though the media tends to lump figures like this together. Colonel Hassan, I don't know if you remember his story, he was a psychiatrist in the army, and he's a Palestinian Arab Muslim, and he was going to be sent to Afghanistan, and he was marginalized in many ways, doesn't justify what he did, by, in this kind of all-male, kind of hierarchical organization that the United States Army is, and eventually felt so ostracized that, like those two young men in Columbine, you do what a lot of kind of maladjusted males tend to do when they feel like, they're being marginalized, particularly by a group of other males or an institution they feel like they should belong to but feel alienated from, buy some guns and kill some of those people. And that's what he did. He went into the mess hall at Fort Hood and he gunned down at least 10 of his colleagues. But the point here is, his story has much more to do with Columbine than it has to do with the story of Osama bin Laden. Unlike Osama bin Laden, Major Hassan was not created by the CIA as part of fighting a proxy war against the Soviets. So I'll leave that though. Drop that as a comment from that time. Muhammad Yunus, another Muslim Nobel Peace Prize winner for his work founding the Grameen Bank and micro-lending in his native Bangladesh. Shireen Ebadi, another Muslim Nobel Peace. These are Nobel Peace Prize winners from the 2000s. In the 21st century Nobel Peace Prize. We're not stretching back into distant memories to find these folks. This is Prime Minister Erdogan and his wife Emine. It's a rare photo of them together in public. Anyone know why it's rare to find a photo of them together in public? Guess? What's your guess? Okay, great. She's wearing a headscarf, okay? She's a Turkish woman. Turkey's what, 5% Muslim population in Turkey? Not 5% Muslim population? What's the Muslim population in Turkey? What's the percentage? Yeah, well over 90%. It's up in the high 90%. So she lives in a majority Muslim country for sure. But she, according to Turkish law, which some people are trying to change gradually, she cannot wear her headscarf at any state function. Okay? So when you're married to the prime minister, almost everywhere you go is de facto a state function. So this may well be somewhere outside of Turkey that they're photographed together. And again, I point this out because a lot of people are shocked. Really, that sounds very strange. I thought all Muslim women were forced to wear their headscarves. Well, I mean, to some degree, you can see some of that dynamic if you look at a contiguous country of Iran, which borders Turkey. And there, while in Turkey you can't register for university with a headscarf, let alone attend a class, but in Iran you can't attend university unless, if you're a woman, unless you're properly covered. Of course, men have to be properly covered as well in Iran. So, where is the stereotype? It's not able to hold when, it's put up against the facts on the ground. This is Ingrid Mattson, a colleague and friend who was president of the Islamic Society of North America. For many years, she's now director of the Islamic Studies program at the University of Western Ontario, I believe. She just left Hartford Seminary. PhD in Islamic Studies from the University of Chicago. She was raised Catholic, at least nominally. She converted to Islam probably about 30 years ago, and that's when she first chose to wear the headscarf. This was her personal choice. It's not a personal choice for every Muslim woman, largely because the way we dress, the way all of you have dressed to come here today, believe it or not, is not your personal choice. Newsflash. Newsflash. Yeah, you picked the green sweatshirt instead of the blue one, I know that. Okay, but the repertoire, the menu from which you are choosing has been chosen for you, hasn't it? So why do we talk about personal choice when we talk about dressing? When so much of dressing, wearing clothes across cultures is not a matter of personal choice. It's a matter of cultural norms. Just thought I'd throw that out there. Muhammad al-Baradei, another Muslim Nobel Peace Prize winner for his work with the International Atomic Energy Association. He was the guy in Iraq saying to his bosses at the UN, please try to convince George Bush not to invade because for the first time I have access to all of Saddam's sites because now he's really frightened. And I haven't found any WMDs, weapons of mass destruction, right? And he didn't find them because they weren't there, right? But that was, of course, the reason why, the stated reason at least, why the United States invaded Iraq. Ruqayya Ghassara, she won the 400-meter dash at the 2004 Asian Games in Doha. If ever you were searching for a quintessential postmodern symbol, it would be the hijab with a Nike swoosh, I think. I don't know if you can catch that. I'm going to say something that is not intended to embarrass Ms. Ghassara, but to sort of drive home probably what is the underlying point I'm trying to make with this slide, and I know it's going on much longer than probably you would like. Ms. Ghassara no longer competes, even though, she dresses like this, not because her coach is saying, but because, this is, she's a Muslim woman and she wants to dress modestly. So she runs with hijab, she ran with hijab, and then covered down to her wrists and with long pants, right? Do you know why she no longer competes? Does anyone know why? Doping. Yeah, Lance Armstrong stuff, okay? She's human. She's a Muslim and she's human. Yes, Muslims are human beings. They can be quite virtuous, and live up to their ideals and values, and they can fail, in the attempt to live up to their ideals and values. Wow. What a concept. Imam Faisal Abdurrauf and his wife Daisy Khan, these are two of the premier terrorists living amongst us here in the United States. I joke, I jest. These are the people responsible for the mosque at Ground Zero, which was neither a mosque or at Ground Zero. Imam Abdurrauf founded the Cordoba Initiative, and he was someone who realized that people were saying, where are the moderate Muslims? Where is the voice of the moderate Muslims? Well, aside from the fact that the term moderate Muslim falls on the ears of many Muslims, like the term non-pedophile priest would fall on the ears of Catholics. Think about that. He thought, I need to, be involved in trying to reclaim my tradition from the people I feel attempted to steal it from me on September 11th, particularly as a U.S. American Muslim. So, the 92nd Street Y is a great, on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, it's a great Jewish community cultural center, lots of educational programs, etc., interreligious stuff, intercultural stuff. Great. We'll use that model, we'll create a kind of Muslim version of that in Lower Manhattan, near Ground Zero, to try to make this statement that Americans, many Americans want to hear, but also that many Muslims want to make, okay? And what happened? Well, worked very closely with the 92nd Street Y people, the plans, zoning board down in Lower Manhattan, 100% unanimous, yes, this is a great plan. And then 2010, midterm elections, people from outside the New York context wanted to try to make a story by which some conservative politicians could pretend that they were better to elect because they would protect the American people from the terrorists among us. And so, Imam Abdul-Rauf got branded as wanting to conquer the United States by building a mosque at Ground Zero. How silly, how unfortunate. Like all human beings, Muslims are diverse and complex social actors. It's the lesson there. Let's see. All right. I'm going to try this one. I'm going to have to skip over some of the ones coming up, but I think this is important. One of the things on a lot of people's slates when they walk into a talk on Islam is violence. This is not new, by the way. This idea that Muslims have a special problem with violence goes way back in European, Euro-Christian, and now North American Christian culture. As for many, many reasons, obviously. I find it ironic that any human being thinks a particular set of other human beings has a distinctive problem with violence, because what they tend to be doing is not looking at themselves in their own context. Ever notice how, very glibly people in the media refer to the war-torn Middle East? But no one ever talks about the war-torn Europe. The greatest carnage that human history has ever seen was on the continent of Europe in the 20th century. Post-Enlightenment, may I remind you. Okay, this great Enlightenment which was bringing Europe out of the Dark Ages. And by the way, in the middle of that, the Shoah, the use of modern technology to exterminate 6 million Jews and 2 million others who were considered not worthy to live by a modern secular ideology of the master race. 2 atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Okay, these were not the doings of Muslims, right? I'm not saying Muslims don't have a capacity for violence. Humans have a capacity for violence. And religion, because it functions, as Clifford Geertz says, at the limits of interpretability, is often used by people to think about violence, particularly when it's okay and when it isn't okay. People, therefore, have this question: why is there so much conflict in the Muslim world? Why, for example, are Sunnis and Shiites killing each other in Iraq? At some point this ebbs and flows, right? Now Sunnis and Shiites Shiites are being killed, in Pakistan now. Recently, maybe you've heard about the Hazaras who were massacred. About 60 people died, and folks are refusing to bury them until the government does something about all of this anti-Shiite violence that's occurring in Pakistan. Is Islam or are Muslims inherently violent? Wouldn't be so easy to say yes. This is the simplistic and unfortunately racist answer to a question like this. Are we missing something? Yeah, we're missing a lot. And what we're missing is historical context. If the mantra of the real estate agent is location, 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 the mantra of the good historian of religion certainly is context, context, context. So here you see an image of youths throwing Molotov cocktails at riot police. This is not an image from Iraq. It doesn't involve Shiites and Sunnis. It's an image from Northern Ireland. And it's a post-Good Friday Accords. It's a 2009 image, post-Good Friday Accords. Things are actually deteriorating in Northern Ireland now. Protestants and Catholics, right? Now some of you may be saying, Alexander, cheap shot. Everybody that knows the Northern Irish situation, the troubles in Northern Ireland, knows that this conflict is not essentially a religious conflict. To which I say, thank you very much. Point proven. What do I mean by that? Usually when people say that, they understand that religion is folded in to this conflict. and that it plays a very important role. No one disagrees with that. But if you want to understand the anatomy of this conflict, and you do so only by looking at religion as the primary cause, you will never understand the anatomy of the conflict. This is an image of Sean Cardinal Brady, the Roman Catholic primate in Ireland, of all Ireland, and Alan Richards, Bishop Alan Richards, who's the Anglican primate in Ireland. Okay. Now, if this is a Protestant-Catholic conflict, right, it's not used for Molotov cocktails. I mean, since when do Jews care that much about religion that they're going to go out in the street and throw Molotov cocktails at riot police, right? Especially used in contemporary Western Europe, right? These guys, this is not some photo op. They were just a few minutes earlier, they were hitting each other over the head with their croziers, and then they just posed for a photo op. No, these guys have been using their episcopal offices to try to resolve this controversy ever since they've held those offices. What are we missing? There's a history here. Protestants and Catholics get along fine for the most part, I think, in Atlanta, in Athens, right? That should be a clue that there's nothing essential about Protestant Christianity and Catholic Christianity that predestines them to be in conflict with one another. It must be something contextual that is at the root of the conflict, and what's contextual really is conquest, domination, power struggles, issues of justice. So the English conquered and colonized part of Ireland. I know now in Ireland people speak English. That's part of the legacy of this. But the Irish, as you know, Irish is very important in Ireland, particularly in the Republic of Ireland. Some people call it Gaelic, right? This is because the Irish had their own distinct ethno-linguistic identity, and the English had theirs. The English came in, they were foreign invaders. And they colonized. They occupied, they colonized. And they had a certain degree of power, and they used that power to subjugate the local population. They also brought in other people to settle there so they could maintain their foothold. That's the genesis of the conflict. It's only later, actually, that the Church of England splits from the Roman Catholic Church. This starts in the 11th century. It's only later in the 15th century that you get the Protestant-Catholic split, and that just is like throwing accelerant on the fire, because now there's a religious element to this already existing conflict that, if leveraged correctly, and there are parties on both sides that wanted to leverage it so, could be used to further polarize the parties involved in this conflict. So, this is my parallel image for the image of the youth throwing the Molotov cocktails. This is Iraq. This is the Grand Mosque at Samarra. And in 2004, I think, or 5, it was bombed supposedly by Sunni insurgents. It's a Shiite mosque, bombed supposedly by Sunni insurgents. But you don't really know, because there are a lot of people that aren't really committed to Sunnism or Shiism, but who are committed to spreading factional violence because as part of their political agenda. They don't know who bombed the mosque. We can say it's Sunni insurgents, okay? This is my parallel picture or analogous picture to the two primates that we saw, primate as in clerical title, right? They are also primates, I suppose, biologically, but the two bishops that we saw. These are Sunni and Shiite clerics in a majlis, in a gathering in Baghdad, when they're agreeing on a fatwa, a joint religious opinion condemning sectarian violence in Iraq. And there were many Fridays during that year and around this meeting where there were joint prayers. Sunnis went to Shiite mosques and Shiites went to Sunni mosques, and the crowd spilled out into the street, and they had joint Jummah prayers. And of course, you read about this. It was on the front page of the New York Times, front page of the Wall Street Journal. CNN covered this Sunni-Shiite convivencia endlessly. You were saying to yourself, when is this going to end? I wish Anderson Cooper, well, he wasn't around, maybe back then, would talk about something else. No. You get, endless cycles when the mosques are bombed. Oh, this is the Shiite-Sunni factionalism. These people, when are they going to get their act together? Why do they do this? We don't know. As if, Americans haven't a clue why people would act violently, in society. We don't understand why that is. And of course, here we're missing an important piece of what's going on. And I have another parallel. I mean, we're missing a map. The borders of the nation-state of Iraq were drawn by whom? Does anybody know? The British, right. The British. So I think I got the British here. There they are. Okay, yes, Iraq was part of the British Mandate at the end of the First World War. The Ottomans made the mistake, in hindsight, of siding with the Germans in the First World War. When the Germans lost, the Ottomans lost, and the French and the British, who were the victorious allies, took the Ottoman lands, except for Anatolia, which was defended by Ataturk and others, and they divided them up amongst themselves. And of course, in order to manage it, they had to put it in terms that were familiar to them. They had to have nation states. The nation state was a very alien socio-political phenomenon, but it was superimposed. All these lines were drawn. When the British drew the lines, right, as many of you know, there were three major, groups. There were the Shiite Arabs living in the south, the largest group, the Sunni Kurds living in the north, the second largest group, and the Sunni Arabs, the smallest group, living in the center. And when the British established the monarchy, when they were sort of pulling back from direct colonial occupation, which group do you think they established the monarchy among? The largest one? No, the smallest one. Why? What's the logic? The logic is, if you establish the monarchy among the smallest group, they will continue to be dependent on you for your support. And it will be, very important for them to try to consolidate their wealth in their group. And if you make an arrangement where their wealth is dependent on making things like oil flow to the former imperial power, all the better. And what they do is kind of human things. They use all that power and wealth, aggrandizing it to themselves and marginalizing these other two larger segments of society. Neither of them feel very much like they're Iraqis because they really haven't been included now. In the Ottoman Empire, these were basically semi-autonomous groups who all had to pay taxes to Istanbul but could run sort of their own affairs. But now they all had to be Iraqis, but suddenly now this new Iraq is run by a relatively small minority of people who now have an inordinate amount of the wealth of this new nation state. In 2003, when the United States invades, and we find out that there are no weapons of mass destruction, what does the United States say? Okay, we're there to bring democracy to Iraq. That's the second reason why we're there. Okay. And the Shiites are delighted. Because democracy, that sounds good. We're the largest group. Right? So it seems like if you can establish democracy in Iraq, we're finally going to have a say in how we're governed, and maybe we can undo some of the extreme injustices we've been suffering under the regime of Saddam Hussein, the Ba'athist party that overthrew the monarchy, but still coming from the Arab Sunni minority. And what did the Arab Sunni minority say to this? They said, "Thank God. And thank the Americans, because we've been losing so much sleep at night. All the good jobs, all the wealth, all the good infrastructure, we've been hoarding for ourselves, and this just isn't right. We should be sharing it with people." And we're very enthusiastic at the prospect of sharing it with people who we have been oppressing for many years. No. They didn't react that way. Why? Because they're Muslims? No, because they're humans. Right? And in Catholic theology, we have a term for this. It's called original sin. Right? They have been oppressing a group, and now that group is going to have the power to oppress them. So you want to resist that potential reality with everything you've got. Are they Sunnis? Are they Shiites? Yes. Does that matter? Yes. Is that the whole story? No. Okay. And that's what you kind of don't get with the media sound bites. Okay, so running out of time, I want to just say a few words about the J word, jihad. And let me say this, what I have up here is one of my main points, that jihad theory and practice and modern so-called jihadism are two different phenomena. And what I have here is Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, the man responsible for organizing a number of fractured Muslim dynasties in the name of jihad, in the name of righteous struggle to defend the community against the Crusaders. And then Osama bin Laden, who also claimed to be a mujahid in his struggle. They're very different, principally because classical jihad theory and practice is actually Muslim just war theory. And what, at least in my opinion, the opinion of the majority of Muslims, I would say, particularly Muslim scholars, what bin Laden was about was a abuse of just war theory. And we know that just war theories lend themselves to abuse. And, there's a long history of just war theory in Catholic Christianity, and there's a long history of abusing just war theory. And of course, abuse is in the eye of the beholder. We know all of this. What I do want to say, though, is that, the word jihad in the Quran basically means the struggle to live righteously. And that's why jihad has such positive resonances for Muslims. That's why Muslims name their kids jihad. Not because they picture the kid, growing up to go in the military and kill people, but because jihad describes the life of the Muslim. Getting up in the summer in the northern hemisphere at 3:30 to say your Fajr prayer is jihad. Try it. Fasting during Ramadan in any season is jihad. Try it. There's a new campaign by the #MyJihad. Okay, and you'll see, no, seriously, it's on Twitter. And you'll get, this is very serious. It's a campaign of Muslims, talking about what their struggle to live righteously involves in their lives. A mother who lost a child to illness and trying to go on and be a good mother to the rest of her children. This is her jihad, okay? So this is what the term jihad means. Why then, you will ask, is that word used for Muslim just war theory? If jihad isn't about fighting, why, when you look at the collections of hadith, for instance, or the fiqh books, the jurisprudence books, and you go to Kitab al-Jihad, the book of jihad, why isn't it about getting up at dawn to say your Fajr prayer, or, struggling to study hard for your exam? Why isn't it about those things? Why is it about fighting? My understanding is this, because the logic here is the only permissible violence in Islam is violence as part of the struggle to live righteously. Now, that doesn't preclude misinterpretations, but that explains the logic of why the term for the struggle to live righteously is, in Muslim jurisprudence, has this technical specific meaning for just war. It's because the only kind of just corporate violence is corporate violence that is part of the struggle for righteousness and justice. The only. So any other form of corporate violence, to gain land, to dominate others, is not jihad, and therefore is haram, is forbidden. I'm going to skip this. This is Arab Spring stuff, but if we want to talk about it in the question and answer period, we can. All right. Yeah, just let me. Last point is about Islamophobia. This is Pastor Terry Jones, famous for his Burn a Quran Day, international Burn a Quran Day, Gainesville, Florida. This is Anders Behring Breivik, who's been recently in the news because his trial is undergoing. This is the guy in Norway that gunned down 70 people on the island in the youth camp. And if you read his manifesto, it's all about stopping Muslims from invading Europe and taking over Western civilization. Our good friend Robert Spencer is quoted like over 65 times in this manifesto. What's interesting about the manifesto is, I don't know if you remember, but earlier on, the Norwegian courts declared him insane. Do you ever notice how, and I don't mean to be too flippant, I know I've been somewhat flippant through the lecture, just trying to use sarcasm as a pedagogical tool, I hope you'll forgive me, but do you ever notice how when white males do this kind of thing, they're crazy? But when brown people do them, it's because their whole religion and culture is crazy. Did you ever notice that? I've noticed it. So they tried to get this guy declared schizophrenic. What's interesting to me is I get a lot of, I was telling a friend about this recently, for some reason, maybe it's because I do Catholic Muslim studies, every once in a while in my mailbox at CTU, I get like a thick book, it's not a book, hundreds of pages handwritten of complete gibberish. It's coming obviously from someone who's schizophrenic, and it's part of it will say you have to read this either because God told me or I've figured out Catholic-Muslim relations, and it's someone who's very mentally unstable. There's no coherence there. If you read Breivik's manifesto, he's very lucid, for sure. That doesn't mean he's not mentally ill. I mean, I think anybody who commits this kind of violence on some level is mentally ill. But they tried to sort of get him exonerated from criminal prosecution. That's not happening. Right? That's not happening. But what is happening is that we have as much of a problem with this kind of thing here in the United States, exhibited by Pastor Terry Jones, as they do in Europe. Islamophobia, I would go so far as to say, is a virulent new form of racism in the West. This is a somewhat controversial thesis. There is a book recently published by Nathan Lean, called The Islamophobia Industry. I think that's the title. Is that the title? Yeah, and that's the title. And then it's very interesting. You should go online and read the Wall Street Journal review of Nathan Lean's book, because the reviewer in the Wall Street Journal claims that Islamophobia doesn't exist. So that Lean is so Southern Poverty Law Center gives you the example of the upswing in all these acts of violence, anti-Muslim hate crimes, but somehow you can claim Islamophobia doesn't exist. What I like about that review in the Wall Street Journal is it actually proves the contrary of what the writer is trying to say. In other words, the review itself is strikingly Islamophobic because it's actually trying to deny the reality that most Muslims, or anybody that knows, has a Muslim friend or knows the Muslim community well, knows is not a figment of their imagination. And how does it not exist? I mean, Islam, What the West Wants to Know, which is Robert Spencer's documentary that he made, which basically says Muslims fall in one of three categories. The first one is the best one, and I hope most Muslims who are here today belong to that. You're the ignorant dupes. You think Islam is a religion of peace and wonderful values, but it really isn't. Okay? So you're just practicing a religion that's actually essentially violent, but you just don't know it. So congratulations, you're put in the best category by Robert Spencer. The second category is the liars. They're the Muslims who know Islam is essentially a violent religion, but they know enough to pretend it's not because they're waiting for the right time to get you. Okay? And then the third group, maybe the most honorable, are the Muslims who know Islam is a violent religion and act upon it. This is Al-Qaeda, whatever, okay? That's it. So great. So 1.4 billion people fall into one of three categories: ignorant dupes, liars, and murderers. Fantastic. Yeah, I thought the jury was still out on the world's most intolerant religion, but obviously not. Here's Pamela Geller and Robert Spencer. Pamela is the sponsor of the Stop the Islamization of America website, which recently had the distinction of making the Southern Poverty Law Center's list of hate websites. That's basically what it is. She's also the creator of the Atlas Shrugs website. She's a great fan of Ayn Rand. Stop the Islamization of America. What's going on? Well, you all know that Sharia law is threatening the very fiber of American society. Actually, I just got a bulletin yesterday. There are 29 initiatives to ban the legitimacy of using Sharia law in U.S. law courts. Now, this is all superfluous. Why? Because the supremacy of U.S. law in the United States is firmly established. But Jewish law, for instance, to give you an example, any law, any religious law that doesn't conflict with U.S. law, is sort of a permissible source of normativity in a U.S. legal context. For instance, the example that comes immediately to mind is a Muslim wants to write the Quranic apportionment of inheritance into his or her will. Okay? There's nothing in U.S. law that says you can't give part of your property to your mother, your father, your sister, your brother, your children, your wife. There's nothing that says you can't do that, and there's nothing that prescribes particular percentages. So if you want to write into your will what the Sharia, what you understand God's will is asking you to do, is commanding you to do, that's fine. That's how you exercise your religion. But if you pass a ballot initiative prohibiting this, basically you're outlawing the practice of Islam. Because a Muslim would not be able to write that in. If they wrote that in and someone wanted to challenge the will, they could do so on the basis that it was related to Sharia law. There's an ordinance, there's a law in the state of Oklahoma. Oklahoma's got like 5 or 4 of these initiatives. Some states have multiple ones that says you can't use Sharia law, so consequently the will is invalidated. So what you've done is you've outlawed the practice of Islam. I want to leave you with Stephen Colbert talking about this, because he does a much better job than I can, and also kind of leaves us on a somewhat humorous note. And then we can have some time for, whoops, what happened?
Get back to that Mendelssohn concerto before she drowns your bunny. Ladies and gentlemen, sex. Now that I've got your attention, death. This is the threat down. Nation, recently Oklahoma passed a ballot initiative forbidding the use of Islamic Sharia law. Thank God. It is the only thing keeping Oklahoma's huge Muslim population from instituting burqa night at the Tulsa Hooters. Unfortunately, in other states, Sharia law is still coming at us in a very creepy way.
We are seeing Sharia creep along in all kinds of Western countries.
Fears that Sharia law is creeping into the United States. There is something called creeping Sharia.
Are you familiar with the phrase Sharia creep?
Could Sharia law be creeping into everyday American life, hidden inside a sandwich?
That's right. A sandwich of death. And for once, I'm not talking about Arby's. And that's why threat number 3 is radical Muslim snacks. As usual, Pat Robertson was all over this meat menace.
Halal food, it sounds innocent. I mean, hey, what's wrong with kosher? That's fine. I like kosher.
Oh, there is no greater friend of kosher than Pat Robertson. I'd go so far as to call him a Hebrew nationalist. But Pat knows the danger of halal.
Halal is prepared according to the rules of Sharia law.
An important distinction, folks. To slaughter an animal under kosher rules, you cut across the neck of a conscious animal with a non-serrated blade in one clean attempt, avoiding the spinal cord. But under halal, you cut across the neck of a conscious animal with a non-serrated blade in one clean attempt, avoiding the spinal cord while saying the name of Allah. That radicalizes the brisket. No problem, you say. I just won't eat it, right? That's what the people in Britain thought.
A London Daily Mail investigation found that Britain's major supermarket chains, fast food restaurants, even some hospitals and schools were serving halal food without telling those who were eating it.
They're eating secret Muslim food. And that's even worse than whatever it is the British consider food now. And folks, Halal has got America in its creep sights.
In the United States, McDonald's, Walmart, and Whole Foods now offer halal choices.
No choices! Folks, we are dangerously close to being served filet-o-fish by Imam McCheese. Vigilance!
Vigilance, nation, vigilance. Okay, that's it for the input, and I'm sorry, I apologize to our presenters for going over time, but we don't have to leave until 6:30, so if we can wrap up by 6:25, that would be good. So, yes, sir. I think this is still working, so we can, yeah. Yes, please. Is that working? Is it working? No, there we go. There we go.
Hello.
Wait, give me a second.
Is it working?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
My name is Taha. I'm an MPA student here at UGA. First of all, welcome from the world windy city. I'm sure you're glad you're not there.
I am very glad.
Snow.
When I left, it was 16 degrees.
I had a question with regards to, I think it was point 5 about, you made the parallel between Protestants and Catholics and Irish and all that stuff. I wonder what you would say to the fact that from a layman's perspective, it seems like I'm a Muslim. And for me, that parallel has some holes because it seems like the people that, like Osama bin Laden, whatever, they use, overtly use scripture as a means to advance their, so religion is not bundled into the political ideology, it's a seminal part of it. And I see that it's a distinction between what you said about Irish.
Right, that's a great point, which is why the point about Ireland was not about Osama bin Laden. We're talking about Shiites and Sunnis in Iraq, which is Protestants and Catholics in Northern Ireland. That doesn't mean that some Protestants and Catholics in Northern Ireland don't explicitly and purposefully implicate religious ideas and values into their violent agenda. You know, I mean, I'm not denying these important connections here. But the question is, or that Osama bin Laden, does the same thing. But the question is, when people think about Sunnis and Shiites killing each other in Iraq, and all they know about these social actors is that they're Sunnis and Shiites, they conclude that it must be something about their religion that is making them fight one another. And why not make the same conclusion about Catholics and Protestants? It's generally because people know more about those social actors, and they know that this conflict is not unidimensional or unicausal, or it doesn't have, like all conflicts, it doesn't have an essence. It has multiple factors that are involved. Religion, of course, is one. It's a powerful one. But it's not the only one, and religion is, of course, being conditioned by some of these other contextual elements, in the same way that it is also conditioning itself, these other contextual elements. So that's the point I'm trying to make, that we could shed a little more light on a situation like sectarian violence in Iraq if we only understood some of these parallelisms with sectarian violence in Northern Ireland. And it's precisely people object on this basis. They say, well, no one in Northern Ireland is doing this in the name of religion. It just happens to be. Well, wait a minute. Some are. And certainly, if historically speaking, religion and religious identity does play a big role in this. I mean, it plays a huge role. But if you don't understand the map and the history of colonial domination in Ireland, and the power struggle and the issues of injustice, you won't really understand that conflict. And if you don't understand similar things about Iraq, you won't understand that either. And if you're tempted to see Islam as a violent religion, then that just proves your point, right? And that's the other problem. No one in the United States, no Catholics or Protestants, evaluating the conflict in Northern Ireland, are tempted to see Protestantism and Catholicism or Christianity in general as a violent religion, even though there's a lot of evidence to support that, that thesis, right? So that's the other issue. Yes? Oh, the Arab Spring. What I'm trying to say about that is, maybe I would just go back. The slide has some interesting images. Maybe I can just go back there for a second. No. Oops. What I want to say is about the Arab Spring. It might not be what you want me to say or what you're interested in, but I wanted to strike a note of caution about Islamic politics, particularly in terms of the so-called Arab Spring, and strike the note of caution to beware the spin doctors obsessed with dying utopian fantasies. And they're on two sides. Here I have an image of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. He's the supreme religious leader of Iran. And Senator Mark Kirk of Illinois, my home state. Okay? Why do I have these two guys up here? Because in February, 2 years ago in February, right after the January 25th revolution in Tahrir Square, these guys were both out, metaphorically kind of out, spinning the Tahrir Square uprising and the revolution of January 25th. Khamenei was saying in a 3.5-hour khutbah, that this is an Islamic revolution and that Egypt is on the verge of establishing an Islamic republic like Iran. Nothing coming further from the truth, but of course what he's doing is he's deeply invested in things like Islamic republics, So he wants desperately this to be the interpretation. He's trying to encourage people to interpret it that way. What's his utopian fantasy? His utopian fantasy, dying because it's proving not to be either realistic or effective, is that the only real solution to some of the ills besetting certain Muslim societies is to establish Islamic republics on the Iranian model that are thoroughly anti-secular and thoroughly anti-Western. That's the only way you're going to solve this problem, folks. So please, go ahead, Tahrir Square. Al-Ikhwan al-Muslimin, make an Islamic republic, do what we did. And encouraging people to think about it that way. Senator Mark Kirk posts on his website an open letter to Barack Obama saying, whatever you do in constructing foreign policy towards Egypt, make sure you marginalize the religious element in Egyptian politics. I mean, how insane is this? Try to marginalize the religious element in U.S. American politics. And this is coming from a Republican. This is why it's so kind of strange, I think, in some ways, right? And so, in other words, don't let, as if the American government could even has any control, don't let the Muslim Brotherhood play a major role. Well, the Muslim Brothers were the principal opposition party to the dictatorship of Mubarak for over 30 years. Of course they're going to play a major role, in whatever comes after. What's his dying utopian fantasy? The only right thing for the Muslim world, actually the right thing for the U.S. and hopefully for the Muslim world, he thinks, is to have a thoroughly Western secular government that keeps religion out of politics entirely. These are two dying utopian fantasies, and yet they tend to dominate the discourse, even in the mass media. It's either got to be a Western secular style government, that's what's going to be good, or it's going to be an Islamic republic, and depending on who you are, you see one or the other as awful, and one or the other as terrific. But both, in my humble opinion, are dying utopian fantasies, and or at least I guess I hope they are. Here's an image of people praying Jum'ah prayer in Tahrir Square. Is there a religious element here? Of course. I don't have a picture of Coptic liturgies taking place, but the Coptic liturgies also took place in Tahrir Square. Also, when Yusuf al-Qaradawi returned to Egypt after many years in exile, and in early February, and he gave his khutbah at Jum'ah prayer in Tahrir Square. He began not by saying, Ya ayyuhal muslimin, all Muslims, which is perfectly logical. You begin a khutbah, a sermon in Jum'ah prayer saying, all Muslims. Ya ayyuhal muslimin wa qibtiyun, all Muslims and Christians. Qibtiyun means Copts, but in Egypt that means Christians, because most of the Christians are, Qibti means Egyptian, actually, and that's Egyptian Christianity. So he was very aware that this uprising, this transformation, this Arab Spring, whatever you want to call it, was for all Egyptians. It wasn't just about Islam and Muslims. This slogan, which came to Egypt from Tunisia, right? الشعب يريد إسقاط النظام. The people want the fall of the regime. The fall of the regime, not the fall of the Egyptian Republic. If you recall, the protesters were wrapping themselves in Egyptian flags, right? And basically saying, we love Egypt, we love a lot of things about our system, we want a new constitution, but it's just the dictator that we want gone, and we want less control of the military. This pamphlet had wide circulation. This is Qissatu Montgomery, the story of in Egyptian, Montgomery, the story of Montgomery. So if you remember, the protesters in Egypt were saying, Salmiya, peaceful, peaceful, keep it peaceful, right? That's because that ethic is deeply rooted in Islam, but also people were talking about Gandhi and King and nonviolent resistance. You can't give the military an excuse to use violence against the population, you know? So are there deep Islamic elements in this revolution? Yes. Are there deep sort of secular, non-violent elements, that are both Christian and Muslim? Yes. And then, of course, my favorite image, one of my favorite images, is young people holding up, this is a Bible with the tasbih, with the Muslim rosary around it here in the left, and on the right, a Quran and a cross. And if you Google this picture, you mostly find it on right-wing websites, either Christians or Muslims complaining about it. It's blasphemy, because you're putting a Muslim rosary on a Bible, or you're putting a cross against the Quran. So, there's that mentality too, and that mentality is in Egypt. But that's not the mentality that was dominant in Tahrir Square. So, that's the only point I wanted to make. Beware the spin doctors, beware these two poles that are really dying utopian fantasies that tend to dominate the discourse about things like this, because the only thing that has any success is something that integrates these elements that are in Egyptian society. Islam, certain ideas about secularity, integrating them in a way that works best for the Egyptian people. And it's going to take a while for that to work itself out. Other comments or questions? Any critical feedback, like, Alexander, you got it wrong, because I get it wrong all the time, so. Okay, one more, we'll go one more and then we'll call it a day.
Thank you so much, first of all, for the wonderful lecture. It's not really a critical comment, just a comment, perhaps. There was a slide in your presentation in which there were two pictures. One was of Salah al-Din, and the other was of Osama bin Laden. Yeah. And you talked about the notion of just war and how there is a thin line which some people overstep. There's just a small comment that I would like to make. The critical difference between the two that I'm sure you know of, but might be helpful for a lot of people if you mention it, is that, in fact, you already mentioned it in a way by saying just war, is that people who go overboard or who misuse it often tend to think that it is okay to kill civilians, like Osama bin Laden did. And they have some twisted notion about it, in the sense that if you are a subservient citizen who accepts the injustices of a certain government, you are worthy of being killed as well. Mm-hmm. This was in contrast to what Salah al-Din, at least what most historians write about him, did. Because in Islam, even the warfare part of jihad very explicitly says that you are not even allowed to cut down trees, let alone kill civilians.
And also, to declare jihad, you have to be an accountable state actor.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't be just an individual in a cave.
Yeah.
Calling for jihad. You have to be an accountable ruler of a Muslim society in order to even credibly propose that something is a jihad.
Exactly. So that was just a comment.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So thank you. Well, I think we should probably call it a day. And thank you for your comments. Thank you for your patience. God bless all of you, yeah.